Welcome to What CEOs Talk About. Do you wonder what CEOs talk about behind closed doors? How they bring their vision to reality? How do they overcome and succeed through adversity? We share that and so much more with each episode. Now, let's get started with the show.
Hello, everybody. My name is Martin Hunter. I am the host of What CEOs Talk About. Katarina, thank you very much for being on the show.
It's my pleasure.
We are going to talk about something that is very important today. And I think that it'll be worthwhile listening and really diving into your own studies about the topic. So before we tackle that, a little word from our sponsors, 3 sponsors today. Urgio, STS Capital Partners, and Ultravest. Katarina, do you know anybody who's exited before, who's had an exit?
I do indeed.
Did they have a good experience or a bad experience?
I get terrible.
Oh, what made it terrible?
Not knowing what to do, getting screwed over, losing money, having regret. I mean, yeah.
The whole shebang. Well, guess what? So when you're looking for an exit, the one thing that STS Capital Partners do very well is really get the most value for your organization by going directly to strategics. So they really get you that extraordinary exit. So now that's great. So now you've got STS Capital Partners that can help you in having strategic partners fall in love with the business, and not in a transactional way, but in a transformational way. I think that's the one thing that STS does really, really well. So now, hopefully, you've got a good experience, not like Katrina's friend who's had a horrible experience. So now you've bought your jet, you've bought your boat, you've traveled the world. What do you do with your money? Philanthropy comes next. That's for sure. So then now what you're doing is you're reaching out, and then Ultravest is really about serving the underserved, non-for-profit, and really building governance around that. So now you've got STS Partner, you've made a whole bunch of money, and now you know what to do with it by investing your time and energy in relying on Ultravest to really help the underserved non-for-profit. Okay, great. The last sponsor is really Urgio. So now you're looking to buy, you're not qualifying, you're not kind of making that first cut for the strategic buyers. Now that's where we bring in Urgio to really help you bring in that operational excellence mindset within the organization and really help you in 3 aspects, which is really growing the company, building M&As, which is indirect growth, and really optimizing the business so that you meet the qualifiers so that you have that extraordinary exit to work with the STS Partner Capitals. So thank you very much to Urgio, STS Capital Partners, and Ultravest for their sponsorship. Now, our guest, Katarina. Who are you? What do you do for a living? Kind of give us the 5-minute elevator pitch.
Sure, 5-minute elevator pitch. Well, I'm Katarina. I'm based out of Vancouver, Canada. Originally from Slovakia and Russia, but raised in the UK, and then lived in many different countries. And after a very diverse career, have found myself landing in the space of diversity, equity, and inclusion. In organizational change management. It's not an area I ever thought I'd be in. And here I am through a world of champagne and fine wine to philanthropy, to living in the Middle East, to now working with organizations here in Canada and along the West Coast, helping them become more diverse, equitable, and inclusive. And really, I mean, it's a world that has become more and more prominent since the events of probably the Me Too movement and then 2020 and the events after George Floyd. And it's been both a breath of fresh air to see companies taking it more seriously, but also to kind of begin to really see the value add. I think before 2020, or even before 2021, actually, it was kind of seen as a bit of a I don't know, a bit of a kind of weird academic topic that people didn't really get. And now that organizations are taking it more seriously and actually investing into it. And now we've got hybrid work, and we've got obviously the pandemic going on, and all of these weird, uncertain new things coming up. DE&I, diversity, equity, inclusion, keeps coming up as kind of the linchpin of how to keep your employees sane and happy and productive and everything that we need. And the more that I'm in this world, the more I realize I don't think I'm going to leave. I think it's something that needs to be propagated, and I'm excited to be in the space.
Fabulous. Thank you. So what is the title of the show for today?
I think the title of the show is probably going to be, if you don't have inclusion, you don't have anything.
So why inclusion and not diversity?
It's a common fallacy, actually. And I think we can almost do like a bit of a timeline of evolution and the thinking behind D&I. Back in the day, we can say that we had like no D&I. We had, overt racism. I mean, we still do. Overt discrimination. Companies were very siloed, and it just was not a world of D&I. And then as we began to talk about it, and again, probably again after Me Too, diversity became more of a focus, and we began to see, and we still do, identity politics, and everyone kind of being identified by their color or their gender or whatever. But diversity became a really big core area of focus. And that actually is a little bit more problematic, because when you focus on diversity, it's all very good and well to point out a person's visual appearance and be like, well, your skin is a different color, therefore you're inevitably going to get treated a different way because of the society that we live in. That's true and that's fair, but does it actually help much?
Agreed.
Not really, right? It doesn't. And the data does show, and the organization that I partner with, we do a lot of, it's all data-driven research, whether it's like the McKinsey studies or whatever it might be. But we know that diversity, when you focus only on diversity, tends to make things a bit worse. People begin to feel more isolated. They feel like they're they're standing out. There begins to be a bit of if we have affirmative action principles, which are really important, don't get me wrong, we need them. But if we only have affirmative action principles, and if we only focus on diversity, if we only focus on a person's visual differences or whatever they might be, you begin to isolate people, and you begin to create a feeling of tokenism. You're only really there for them because of X, Y, and Z. Then there begins to become a sentiment of, well, if I get promoted, the only reason I'm getting promoted is because I'm X, Y, or Z. You begin to breed resentment, again, more isolation. And we actually see that attrition rates will go up, and performance will go down, and harassment will go up, and the whole kind of undercover resistance will start to go up. And that's where you get more covert racism, more covert sexism, and again, more resentment. So focusing on diversity doesn't actually work. It's sort of a dated idea. And then you also do get identity politics too, which is a whole can of worms that, I know Canada has a lot of rhetoric around that space. So what we found, and what the data shows, is that if you focus on inclusion, that's where you actually begin to see DE&I be implemented more correctly, and people be happier, and people actually get the results that they're looking for. Because when you focus on inclusion, you move away from the identity politics, and you move more into a state of, how can we get everyone to feel included, irrespective of your gender, your race, or your age, or your religion, or whatever it might be. But how do we make everyone feel included? And when you feel included, you can feel psychologically safe. And when you feel psychologically safe, bit of a long term for essentially saying you feel safe. But when you feel psychologically safe, you obviously are more productive. You obviously don't want to leave the company that you're at. You obviously do get along better with people, and you're just generally a happier person. So it's in inclusion that we find the sweet spot of DE&I. So Yeah.
You've said it you've said it eloquently, because for the longest time, I was trying to have a conversation about how if you identify somebody by their color and you go, well, you need to serve all of the, I don't know, Asian community. Okay, I get that. But how is that any different than saying they're Asian? You're using the same terminology. You're using that same box to identify those people. So I think that you've been able to vocalize what I've been trying to explain for so long, that inclusivity is the way, regardless of color, age, creed, sexuality, religion, whatever, is to say, but then sometimes it gets turned around because some people feel, and I'd like to get your opinion on that, say, okay, I tend to, and I have a lot to learn. As a managing partner of my firm, I always look to learn. And you say, well, I want to hire people on their capability, their capacity, their attitude, skill, knowledge, and experience. And you close your eyes and you say, okay, great, let's do that. But then some people say, well, it won't move the pendulum because so many people have been, what's that, institutional racism that says gives more opportunities to certain people. So one of the critical components that we had on a previous podcast with Jason Mercer was you have to be intentional solutions for intentional problems, meaning that sometimes you have to do outreach in areas that you would not necessarily do outreaches. Yeah. But again, I think you've nailed it in removing the word diversity. Biodiversity works for mine reconstitution. So you've mined an area, you want to bring the biodiversity back because you need to have all these elements in the chain. It's different for human beings, in my opinion. And I think the way that you've said it, inclusivity, is more safe, more humane than and less impactful than calling it diversity.
I wouldn't say that I'm removing diversity, though. I think we need to be careful here. I think because at the end of the day, like we're two white people here on a podcast. Like, discrimination is real, right? What we're saying is that, and institutionalized racism is real, and sexism is real. It's all real. It needs to be addressed. What I think the inclusion angle is important to do is that, and this is what I found in my studies, it's like, it's all very good and well to go down the academic route, learn about this all, get incredibly angry and frustrated, begin to, wave the cannon of DE&I and anti-racism and anti-sexism. And like, I'm an Eastern European migrant myself, right? Like my parents have very thick Eastern European accents. And after Brexit happened, there's a wave of racism at them. And they're white. So it's more than just what we can see on the surface. And things need to be done to address that. What I think is more kind of interesting is like, if we take out the academic stuff and we're talking purely about business and organizations and how to make them more diverse, equitable, and inclusive, we can't focus on diversity because there isn't that much diversity in the company. So it will feel tokenistic. Like, we have to kind of read the room and actually be a bit vulnerable and own the fact that, the company has got here on the back of institutionalized racism and sexism, and it is what it is. And we need to build awareness of that, yes. And we need to address that. And we do need affirmative action principles, yes. And we do need to be hiring outside of our norms. At the same time, there is a very real reality that, the people that you're going to be hiring are going to be coming from a certain demographic, very likely. So there's a lot of things we need to be thinking about to address on a kind of structural level. Like, if we think about it from a structural and a behavioral science level, right? The structural level will mean, okay, we need to start to de-bias our performance management, de-bias our hiring principles, bring in more affirmative action, actually try to bring in more equality of opportunity into the organization. These are all legal frameworks, like actual structural things that we need to implement into an organization to address the systematic inequalities that have led to the demographic that is in that organization in the first place. That's one thing we need to be doing. On the other hand, as well, though, you need to be working with the behaviors of the people in that organization. Because if you only focus on the structural, which I think most companies have done, and they focused on like the diversity and let's hire X, Y, and Z people and just put, tokenistically put them there, you're going to get resentment. You're going to get kickback. You're going to get pushback.
Absolutely,
and that's where diversity becomes really problematic, because that's when you start to have, I see it here in Canada with some of my clients. If I'm working up with an energy company of predominantly white blue collar men, and then they've got Indigenous relations and, and they're trying to hand out jobs and just kind of tick that box that they're doing something, no wonder everyone's angry and resentful. And actually there's a backlash and they're like, well, I'm not getting paid enough. And why is this guy getting the job when actually I've been working here for 10, 15 years trying to feed my family and I'm a Canadian citizen, blah, 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 blah. That whole rhetoric, that is because you only have the structural stuff, right? And I get that. And so on the one hand, we need it because it's not okay to carry on being predominantly, a white organization. It's not okay. That needs to be addressed. But we also need to work with the behaviors, and the behaviors is where the inclusion angle becomes really important. And there's a really good theorist called Dolly Chugg. She talks about heat and light. I think I might have butchered her surname, but Dolly Chugg.
That's right. We'll fix it up.
She talks about heat and light. And I remember when I learned about her perspective, I was like, okay, this I get. In heat and light, like the heat approach is very much kind of what works in academia, what works in activism. That's when, let's say we learn about, systematic racism or whatever. We learn about some kind of horrific oppression. There's going to be anger, there's going to be emotion, and heat is very much necessary at that point because we actually want to build a fire. After George Floyd, we wanted to build a fire and bring awareness and bring anger and emotion to the cause because it needed that, and it needs that still, right? Especially from the academic and activist and philanthropic space. But if we're trying to work in an actual corporate organization where you're trying to do business and trying to get things done and people aren't necessarily from that world, it's not going to work. You're going to get cancel culture, people getting fired left, right, and center, people freaking out, undercover resistance, and probably a backlash and probably more racism down the line. Doesn't work. Instead, when it comes to business, you need what she calls the light approach. And the light approach is very much, okay, let's use logic and reason and compassion and empathy and create psychological safety and guide people into seeing the light, right? So it's much more kind of calm and tempered and measured. And that's where the inclusion is critical. Because one thing that I love about what I do with DE&I is going to companies and talking about, hey, like, white blue collar men, like, I get it. You probably feel really, really crap that actually your pay hasn't gone up. Someone else is taking your job. You don't really understand why. And this all just feels really disenfranchising. We get it. And in a way it is. And at the same time, DE&I is for everybody. It's not just for minority groups or for women. It is for everyone. Because actually when we all feel included, when we are all included, and we do all have psychological safety, and we are all seen for who we are, and there are different ways of doing that, we can actually all feel safe together. We can all actually be rewarded for our merit properly, because meritocracy does not exist right now. And when we're all actually rewarded properly, we can all show up as our best selves. And you're not being kicked out because of the color of your skin or your gender. We're actually all in it together, all of us. And one final thing I'll add is, like, especially working with that demographic of the white blue collar male, there's an element of disenfranchisement there that is very much felt and part of the lived experience that isn't talked about or really seen. And that's class. People don't talk about economic status, right? So again, when we think about inclusion, you can begin to actually incorporate a language of class and economic status alongside race and gender and disabilities and whatever it might be, to actually recognize that, yeah, just because you are, I don't know, a white male doesn't mean that you don't feel isolated or excluded or rubbish when you come to work, right? You probably do, because of your class and your demographic and maybe the fact that technology is going to take your job and blah, blah, blah. So let's talk about that as we talk about other relations and other diverse groups. And let's actually recognize that with DE&I, we can solve for everything, right? So it's useful for you too.
So we've got a marketing strategy session, and we're targeting a specific demographic for one of the innovative products that we have in a line of SKUs. And so we've got a young crowd, and one of the young ladies, and I'll say she's from Ireland, so she had this beautiful accent, and everybody really enjoyed her accent. And she speaks up. She was very lively, and she says, "You know what? At a previous workplace that I have in the fashion, I had to present to these old crusty white guys," and she just goes on and on and on of how disenchanted she was. And so I was looking at everybody on the Zoom call who was just kind of like eyes open, and they're like, that Martin's like 50 years old. He's no white guy, So I start laughing, and she just realizes what she said. And she said, "I'm so sorry." I said, "It's okay. It's okay. It's important because I want to talk about bringing the light. It's okay. I don't know everything. I don't know what I don't know." A lot of people say, "Okay, so you're a white male, 50, you're born in 1970s, you're privileged." Okay, great. I worked my ass off. Like you, I come from a poor family. I've earned a lot of stuff that I'm at, but it's hard for us to understand when we've been down that path, when it's all been experienced before. So for us to say, "Hey, you guys are the white old guys are the bad guys," we're not all bad. Mm-hmm. It's just we don't know what we don't know. So sometimes and it was funny because if there is somebody who was progressive in the thought process of bringing everybody together, it was me. But I think that's the key point that you're trying to make, is that inclusivity is not about, hey, who brings what, but understanding of bringing the light to the situation and say, "Hey, hold on a second. Let's be inclusive in the conversation that we've got." And it was brought and it was addressed with mm-hmm. fun and humor and enlightenment and education. And I think that was that term, it just keeps sticking in my head, Katrina, of inclusivity. Now, diversity and everything is important. And if I was to prioritize something, that for me is really what sticks with me, right?
Yeah. And I think one thing I realized as I did my master's degree in this field, and I'd been living in the Middle East, and I'd been living there for 2 years, and I mean, living there nearly killed me. It was awful. But it was awful for me because I went in being quite naive about it, and mm-hmm. being a single white blonde female working out there, and I was working in the champagne trade as well at the time. And the thing that really struck me was like, okay, yeah, I felt really incredibly unsafe at many points in my time there, and I had a lot of kind of dodgy run-ins that were, in retrospect, like not good. I mean, even then they were not good. But the thing that really struck me was actually looking at masculinity in the Middle East and looking at the different hierarchies of race and gender amongst the men, mm-hmm. amongst the laborers and the construction workers, and kind of essentially, I would go so far as saying, it's borderline slavery in many. No, it's not slavery, but like,
it is, yes.
You know what I mean? And when I was really observing that, and I was very lucky, I had a very good friend who worked for Al Jazeera, and I got to go to the labor camps, and I got to see the conditions, and kind of really looking at it and thinking, okay, from an intersectionality point of view, how interesting that coming from the UK, where I'd been living before, or I'd been living in Spain, but coming from Europe and looking at, okay, the hierarchy of races, and how even within the male gender, there's so many mm-hmm. differences and so many kind of nuances based on your race, on your on your nationality, on your age, on your class. Like, it's much more than just gender, right? It's much more than just race. Mm-hmm. And when I really kind of began to get my head around it all and look at it and analyze it and study it, and then I went and did my master's, I just, at the beginning of it, I was like, I don't see a solution to this. I don't know how on earth we're ever mm-hmm. going to find equality of opportunity or anything. Like, we're just inherently screwed as humanity. Like, I don't see how this will ever work out. It's too inbuilt. I mean, God, if you even trace down religion, like, why is God a man? Like this, it's just so deep. It's so deep. And I spent the first bit of my master's being really depressed about everything and thinking, like, why am I even studying this? Like, I just give up. And one thing that I've really gained, because after that I went off and did philanthropy, and again, similar kind of feelings of just defeat. One thing I've really gained actually in working in organizational management and looking at it from an inclusion lens is like, there is actually hope. There is actually hope, because I think if we begin to create psychological safety amongst people, irrespective of whether they're male, female, white, doesn't matter, but begin to create psychological safety by helping people feel seen. And that's the key thing, because we know that to build inclusion, you need to have a sense of, you need to feel that you're seen, you're understood, you're valued, you're respected for who you are, but you also belong as part of a broader community, that you are integrated in that community. And so if we can begin to focus on that, and we create that psychological safety, and everyone kind of puts their guard down a little bit and begins to look at one another as like, okay, there's actually a common humanity here, then I think we can begin to talk about diversity properly in a way that does actually begin to solve for the inequalities that we have. Because inequality is real. It does need to be addressed, but it needs to be addressed from a psychologically safe, healthy way. Otherwise, we're just going to go down the academic route, be screaming at each other, getting angry, getting frustrated, and not really seeing any tangible results.
People are very scared,
Sure.
and they're afraid to lose what they've gained, right? So they go, oh, I've worked so hard, this is what I've done, and so instead of having that guard up, be courageous, stand up, you're a human being. What is it that you're truly going to lose by including and listening and participating in the conversation? And that's the key, right? Is when we have democracy, which is built on discussion, meaning that instead of current politics bug me a lot, because it's a lot of finger pointing. When I think of the forefathers that created democracy, was about bringing people together and say, what's your view? What's my view? And let's agree. And it's okay to disagree. It is clearly, but to blame one side or the other, regardless, you're in Canada, US, I feel the conversation, I think the pendulum has swung with consumerism. And I'm hoping that humanity will speak through their purchasing habits, because money talks. Let's face it. Everybody wants money. Everybody wants to exit their company. Everybody wants to build something. I want a better car. I want a nice truck. We all want things. I want to leave a better future for my kids than what I've had. So we feel the need to amass. And I think that human beings forget that when you look at Amazon, and you look at some of the villages that they have nothing. They make their own spears, they make their own, but yet everybody's happy because they share everything, because they see the importance of the humanity and the relationship over access to things. And I think that if we want to hit inclusion where it matters, it has to hit the wallet in certain people. And unfortunately, in 7 billion people, there are some greedy bastards out there, regardless. And we won't be able to fix the world completely. But I look at the difference now in regards to wearing seatbelts, not drinking and driving, smoking, wearing seatbelts, nut milk versus cow's milk. There's a lot of things that have changed over the years that make life better. And I think that burning down the house, although I agree, making the fire and being angry when somebody dies, somebody should be angry. It's just a normal reaction that we have. And I think that being able to learn from that is what I hope that humanity is capable of. Hey, continuous improvement, change. What can I change today? And if everybody had that same mindset of how do I improve myself? How do I become more inclusive? I think the word that comes to mind is celebrate diversity. right? I think when I go to different places, I go, oh man, their Indian sucks. And like food wise, right? Or they don't have good sushi. And I go, man, I love where I live because there's so much diverse in the food. Well, that diversity comes with culture. So you want to appreciate the cuisine and everything. And when you go to different places around the world, as you've traveled, the one thing that permeates is the food. The food is very different from one place to another. And I think that we should associate the diversity of the culture that's associated with that. So I'm not giving up anything by eating curry. I'm celebrating their culture and I'm appreciating it for what they have. So why not apply the same principles that you have at the table without the food with the individuals? So when I was in Western Africa, in the mining industry, I had never been truly exposed to the Muslim religion. Never. And so you've heard it and you do it. And so on a Friday, there was a prayer. And every Friday there'd be a prayer. And one time I just sat down far enough to be able to watch. And so the imam got up and he came to me and I was like, uh-oh, I'm in trouble now. So he comes up to me and he says, Mr. Martin, everything okay? I was like, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt. I was just looking to learn. And he said, what? I said, I've never seen prayer. So he's like, why do you want to learn? Because I want to better understand what makes you happy. What are you praying to? How can I help? And he invited me. And I think that inclusivity of understanding, of celebrating somebody's diversity is respecting who they are and where they come from. But I think ultimately, to your point of how does this apply to business, it's really that inclusivity now to a point where sometimes we found it quite hilarious in inclusivity that Western Africa is very divided between Christians and Muslims. And the Muslims would take advantage of the Christian holidays and the Christians would take advantage of the Muslim holidays. So we would never get any work done. So that was really funny. So I think that if there's something to look forward to, look at younger CEOs always looking to contribute, right? So then what's your path? What's your take? How do you see the future for the people that are listening? So I'm a CEO, and let's go older crowd first. Okay. I'm a white guy, 50 years old, same as Martin. I'm listening to the podcast. Shit. I don't know anything about this. Where do I start? How do I don't want to be seen as a bad guy. What do I need to do?
Good question. I think, if we think about how do you drive behavioral change, right? There are three main components to that. The number one component is you have to have a belief in what you're actually moving towards. If you don't believe in what you're trying to change, there's no point. Absolutely no point. Step two is to build up the capability. So learn the behaviors and learn what you need to be doing differently in order to behave differently and drive a different result. And step three is you need to create an environment where you can practice and, quote unquote, activate your learnings or essentially just be in the context where you can actually apply your new behaviors. It's a pretty common model of behavioral change. And so when we think about what does that look like with becoming more diverse, equitable, and inclusive and applying that to the organization, and you're, a middle-aged, middle-class white dude, well, number one is you have to really believe in it first. And that's probably going to be a bit tricky. And like you said before, the classic thing, and I mean, I hear this all the time, is but I worked really hard and I'm not that privileged. And, I didn't inherit any money from mum and dad and I'm self-made and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, yeah, I get that. But you are also white and you are also male. So you also have been earning more than I have, right? Historically. And that is fact. I mean, I'm not even going to go into that debate. That is fact.
That is a fact.
And at the same time, I know I've been earning more than a woman of a different skin color. So that's also a fact. And so you have to really believe in it. And to believe in it, it comes down to building awareness, right? You have to build up enough awareness of your own. I don't like the term privilege. I think it's a really dead term that's been overused. And I just think we all need to move away from that term. But you do need to build up a healthy awareness of the different things in life that have given you a leg up, right? Like what things in life have you really benefited from, have been strengths in your life, and where have there been hindrances and where have things been hard? Like, for example, if your parents were alcoholics or you have a history of depression, they're going to be things that negatively affect your life outcome. But if you inherited a home or you inherited any kind of wealth from your family, or if you went to university, these are all things that really benefited your life, right? So I think becoming very aware of the things in life that you've done well with, being grateful for them, and then getting a strong awareness and understanding of how other people have it, right? And that'll probably come down to a lot of literature reading, a lot of self-education, but really getting your head around what does it actually mean to be a white male in this world? And I think from there, once you have that kind of holistic understanding of your position in a broader global context, then there'll naturally be an awareness of like, oh, wow, okay, yeah, I'm doing pretty well. I'm doing really well compared to a lot of people. I actually am historically the most kind of favorably treated population. And whilst I have had X, Y, and Z challenges in my life, generally speaking, I'm in a good position. And actually, in learning about this, the power, quote unquote, that I'm going to have to give up, am I really giving it up?
No.
Probably not.
No.
Right? You're not giving anything up, really. So I think the awareness building is going to be incredibly key, and that's going to be through self-education and other types of education in order to build up the belief and to not be afraid of DE&I, because none of us need to be afraid of DE&I. It's such a fallacy where, I mean, this comes down to whole scarcity thing, right? Of like, oh, if I give up my power, I'm suddenly going to be thrown out of my job and the company's going to be run by like, I don't even know. Like, it won't.
Oh, it's so funny. What are you giving up by helping others? Right? Seriously.
Nothing.
What are you giving up?
Nothing.
You're giving nothing away for helping others. You're just recognizing that here's where I am. Yeah, you know what? Doors opened up a little bit more for me than others. And even if...
Totally. And go on.
Even if you had to kick one or two doors down, they were not cemented doors. No. And now...
And we know from data that diversity drives business. I think that's a McKinsey stat that like when there's a diverse board and it's like innovation goes up. No, revenues go up by like 19% and innovation goes up by X percent. And actually, if we're talking about startups, there's some really great stats from BCG and McKinsey on how having a diverse team, diverse board and inclusion, you're literally so much more likely to have a higher exit. Like the talent pool will increase. People are it's just better for everyone. You're not losing anything.
It's so funny because we at Urgio are we're at a neck and neck. So every time we bring somebody on board, we're like, it's always a balance. What are we at? 51% male, 49% female, vice versa. Sometimes when we're hiring, and it's funny because most women in our company saying, well, we don't want to be all female. And some of us guys were like, we don't want to be all male because we don't want to all think the same way. And I think it's funny because we're all fighting for inclusivity in a way that defends and that celebrates each other's successes, right? When I want something thought through, I always include more women at Urgio than men in the conversation because women tend to be more broader in scope in mindset. I think it's a biological thing. Like and we have a lot of mothers at Urgio and they understand all aspects. Well, that can impact this, right? Because they understand the value of family and stuff like that. Where guys, if I want to get shit done fast, then I put a whole bunch of guys on it and it's done. It's done really, really quick. But at what price? So there's different, you have to celebrate the attitude, skills, and knowledge that diversity brings and how to leverage that. and who.
For
And
sure.
so that's, you're absolutely right in regards to you're not losing anything by helping somebody.
No, not at all. And I think like not to get into a biological essentialism debate on the differences between men and women, right? Like none of that's really, I remember, I don't quote me on this, but I remember doing a study on like how small the differences actually are between men and women from a biological level, right? When it comes to thinking, I mean, this is all kind of generally unknown stuff still, is my understanding. But the point is that in helping others, you're not losing any power. You might have to distribute wealth in an organization and have some kind of pay equity scheme. And you might have to have more talent and have more diverse talent in there. But how is that, unless you're genuinely just rubbish at your job and somebody else deserves to have your job, then by all means. But surely that's the meritocracy we're all gunning for anyway.
Absolutely.
That is democracy, right? So, but again, I think the problem there, and this is a deeper problem, is that if we talk about, North America, the UK, the white male figure has been raised historically with a rhetoric of entitlement,
Correct.
right? If you think about like the quote unquote American dream and the capitalist dream and even the kind of the cowboy myth, like you really trace it back to the archetypes of American culture. Like, God, you have the cowboy, and what was his thing? Go into the West and claim the land and bring back food and territory for your family. And who was he? He was a white, free-spirited man, right? Who was entitled to this land. And that's a narrative that's not really been questioned. And it's so deep into the American psyche, right? Even if you kind of think back to, I don't think Trump was necessarily, I don't know, Trump doesn't really create much sense. But if you go back to the language of like George W. Bush back in the day, it was so much about kind of that manifest destiny and Western frontier and claiming the land and blah, blah, blah. And that in and of itself will breed a feeling of entitlement, which if you are a white dude and you're born into a North American culture, the world is your oyster, or at least that's what you're told, which drives its own problems, right? Because then again, if you think about it from an economic perspective, you have these blue-collar white American men who have been promised the American dream, promised that they're going to get everything that they believe that they're entitled to. You've got presidents like Ronald Reagan running around with their cowboy boots and kind of acting like they're there with the people. But then neoliberalism, they're not getting what they thought they'd be getting. And instead, then they see that, oh, well, why is this black guy getting more than I'm getting? Why is this woman getting the job that I thought I'd be getting? Of course, you're going to breed resentment and anger. There's going to be a backlash. So a lot of the problem is that entitlement narrative, right? That narrative of, well, just because you're a white dude in America, you get to have the American dream. That's not really the case anymore. That's the problem. It's not so much the diversity or it's the fact that there's a belief that I deserve this power and this power is mine and it's not there to be shared. And then you have, then you have this whole capitalism narrative of scarcity, right? That only you can have it. And if you're sharing it with someone else, then it's going to be gone. That needs to be changed too. That's a much bigger, socio-political, economic challenge, right?
The sense of entitlement drives me nuts, regardless of where you are, right? So you go, even in Africa, we talked about racism in all of it says it's really based on the fact of entitlement, right? So I've seen some pretty horrific racist acts in my time in the military in back in the 80s and 90s. And that was horrific, right? And you go, it has nothing to do with color. It has everything to do with entitlement. My tribe is better than your tribe, and I'm better. Yeah. And so, and then you look at what's happening in Myanmar and the same thing like that. Is this sense of entitlement that we're better than you, and therefore, here's what we're going to do. And I think that is critical in our human faults. Trying to believe that I am I deserve more than you. I think that's crippling. That you've nailed it, Katrina. The entitlement is what is. I mean, I hear my generation always saying, "Oh, those millennials, they're entitled. And those millennials, they're entitled. They feel that the whole world." I was like, "Shut up, man." Like when you're growing up, you're like, "Okay, get out of there, baby boomers. We'll show you how it's done."
I was gonna say, like, you have all the homes. Like we're all like bleeding here, like dying. Like Christ.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
We were no different. We're like, you want to call the hipsters with beards. Back then it was hippies. You grew up differently. So it's always the same. It's always the same problems recycled, and that's what I'm trying to. That I'm trying to do is when I saw about 7 or 8 years back, when I saw this data that 80% of women were paid less than men. 80%. And that's, I had a what the fuck moment. And I was like,
oh, and it still happens.
I know.
Like,
and
literally.
So I said, what can I do? Yeah. Right. So I joined the group. I help women in mining BC. I said, okay, I'm a guy. How can I help? Right. How can I leverage what I know and what I can do to help? Mm-hmm. And then I saw Ariel, my daughter, who wants to be a designer and engineer. And I looked at the engineer. There's only 2% of females that I was like, there's no way. So how do I support my daughter in creating a network and creating self-awareness and what's the word I'm looking for? So not self-discipline, but oh my goodness, I just lost a word. To be not self-aware, but
self-sufficient.
No, to like herself. Oh, what's the word?
Yeah,
self-esteem. Thank you. Why can I? Yeah, to make sure that her self-esteem, that no boy would ever tell her what to do, ever.
Yeah.
Ever. Kickboxing, field hockey, rugby. What I know as a dude, what can I bring as a father figure to help her build up both her emotional, physical, and mental status to be able to say, I am of equal standing. And I will not accept any boy to tell me what to do. Now, if the boy's a boss and he has earned his place, regardless, the boss is the boss, male, female, doesn't matter. Respect authority and the rules, but don't. I've been working hard to empower that on that side. So giving up, I've not given anything else but time to help my daughter grow and whoever else in the teams.
Yeah, no, for sure. And that's, I mean, it's kind of heartbreaking though, is when it's like, as a woman, one of my arguments is like, oh, well, think of your daughter and wife. And I'm like, why should I have to bring an emotional thing to get men to see basic equality? But I was going to say with the whole entitlement thing, and what you were saying, how, we keep coming back to that feeling of entitlement. And like, the reason for that is like one of the fundamental biases in the human psyche, whether I don't care where you're from, but one of the things that the brain does inherently is it has a belief, I've had it harder than you have, and therefore I deserve this. That is just a human fallacy. It's just something that we're all born with. It's one of our, if we think about all the different kind of quote unquote unconscious biases we have, there are so many different ones, and you can never get rid of them, right? We need unconscious biases to get through life. If you didn't have one, then you wouldn't put a seatbelt on and you'd fall apart and, you'd get nothing done. We need them. But one unhelpful one is this belief that I've had it really tough, you've had it easier, therefore I, by default, deserve X, Y, and Z. That is just part of the human condition. And I think that, again, a lot of this will come down to awareness raising of, well, if we know that's part of the human condition, we can actually begin to implement different checks and balances on that belief. Same way that we have to kind of reframe our limiting beliefs, right? Like if you're trying to, God forbid, do the whole manifestation thing, which I'm all for, but if you're trying to go down the whole belief changing angle, well, one of them is going to be around unconscious bias too.
Agreed.
And so maybe rather than thinking I've had it really tough and I've had to struggle and blah, 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 think, okay, that's true. And other people have had to struggle too. And that doesn't mean that I'm inherently more entitled than they are.
Absolutely.
Right.
And hence, Tracy and I, my spouse and partner in life, we always talk about bringing the kids, not just to resorts and stuff, but to areas where you go, oh, the world is very different than what I know, right? Oh, we go to Mexico, great, fabulous. We're an all-inclusive resort. You know that not a lot of people get this, right? So to be able to be a good parent, to educate and build some awareness. And I think the biggest thing that I get from our conversation is one, I think that you nailed it, is that diversity is critical. It's important. But inclusivity, creating that psychological safety that I talk about continuously, is when people feel safe, regardless of color, creed, religion, sexuality, sex, is what can I do to help my team achieve that? And I think that's very concrete. You don't have to have a PhD. You don't have to have all the systems in place. Is how do I make my workforce, my company more inclusive?
Yeah. And you know what? One of the easiest ways of doing that, I don't think surveys do much good, right? People lie on surveys and then trying to like run through them. But do you like open discussion groups? Again, there will be probably 8 times out of 10, the people will be afraid of speaking up to their C-suite. They won't trust them, right? And any individual contributor or any person on the ground will be thinking, oh, there's no way in hell I'm ever going to be honest, right? And then most managers will be thinking the same thing. So like organizational change is driven from the top down. If you are a leader and you are running an organization and you want to start fostering more diversity, equity, and inclusion, because you know, and if you don't know, then I can send over the data and the stats about how good it is for your organization. But you know that at the end of the day, not only do you kind of have to do it now because you're going to be really left behind in this day and age and you're just going to look bad from a reputation point of view, but you know that it's going to be good for the organization in the long run and it's going to make you a better partner and a better parent, etc. Then because leaders are the ones who drive the culture, you start with humility, right? You start with humility. You start with owning the fact that, hey, you don't know that much about this at this point, but you're committed to learning. And in your commitment to learning, you're committed to gaining knowledge, building awareness, building up your own motivation, building up your own belief. You want to create psychological safety across the organization. And then you leave it, you ask, what do you need to feel psychologically safe? And when you get the responses, they might not be what you want to hear, but you have to practice what you preach and show humility. And we know that good leadership is truly about, Brene Brown talks about it all the time, right? It's about that vulnerability. It's about that empathy. It's about compassion. That is still good leadership. That is like, having the direction to go forward into the right direction, towards the light is important. And admitting that you don't necessarily know how, but you want to create psychological safety and you're committed, that's pretty much all you need to do to begin with.
The one thing that I would like to add to that, just having an open door policy doesn't mean that you're a good leader. And what I mean by that is that's a passive get out of jail free card saying, I have an open door policy. Well, shut up. When have you crossed somebody's threshold and say, hey, Katrina, do you have 5 minutes? Sure, boss. How are we doing on diversity inclusion? How can we become better? Can you teach me something? And you would be impressed at how much spending 5 minutes or 10 minutes with anybody within your organization to be really diligent and being actively seeking knowledge, not being passive, saying, my door's open, I'm just going to keep on doing. No. Yeah. You have to be actively seeking, because I think it comes back to your belief. If you say that you're doing it, but you're not doing it, then you don't believe in it. All you're doing is you're just, hey, I'm just doing it because I'm compliant. You're not committed.
No, for sure. I agree. I think there's a lot of passive things that I see getting done, right? When everyone's like, well, I have a diversity, equity, and inclusion council. Who cares? Like, literally, who cares? If they're not doing anything, if they're not empowered, and if there's a culture of fear, it doesn't mean anything. We did the one that kills me. We did unconscious bias awareness training. The data shows really clearly that actually doing 1 or 2 sessions of unconscious bias awareness training will make things worse, because you have the same thing in philanthropy. Again, another ironically unconscious bias of humanity is that when you've done a bit of awareness training, you think, well, I've done the awareness training and now I'm miraculously healed and I'm not going to make the mistakes again. So we know actually from the charity world that when people are on the London Tube, on the Underground, and they see some godforsaken poster saying, oh, donate £1 or whatever, 50 pence to X, Y, and Z charity, and you might save blah, blah, blah. And people go and do that. They actually feel so good about themselves that they're more likely statistically to like slam the door in another person's face or do something bad or like throw litter, right? Because I can't remember what. They feel entitled, exactly.
Because they feel entitled.
And so the same thing with unconscious bias
quid.
awareness training. We've done the studies. I mean, not we, but like, and we know that if people do unconscious bias awareness training and only that, they're actually more likely to go off and be awful because they're like, well, I'm not a racist anymore. That's not true. It's another passive thing, right? Same thing with the open door policy. Doesn't mean anything. So you have to change your behaviors. You have to consciously add new behaviors. And I think one of the most underutilized things that a good leader can do in an organization is, like you said, have the kind of 5-minute one-on-ones with people, with random individual contributors, and ask them questions like, give me 10 moments of exclusion that you've experienced, right? Because that's an interesting way of looking at what are the tangible things we need to fix. So if you go to the UK, for example, and you ask, what are 10 moments of exclusion? Common answers would have been like, well, everyone goes for drinks after work, and that's kind of our bonding. I can't drink because I'm from a family of recovered alcoholics, and I'm therefore unable to participate, or it's just not fun for me. Or equally now in this world of hybrid work, everyone's doing like, I don't know, happy hours after a certain time, but so I actually have to go care after my parents, or my child has COVID, or I simply don't have that luxury. Or even, again, hybrid working. I can't go to the office. I actually don't have the time to go to the office because I'm caring for X, Y, and Z. So I think getting really clear on what moments of exclusion are people feeling and having a few examples will begin to show you in the organization how can you very quickly, with very little effort, begin to build more inclusion, right? It's pretty simple.
I agree.
Not at all.
It's not as demanding as people
Not
think.
At all.
No. It's not this big, dark thing that you go, I have to wear tights and I have to wear a Superman cape and I have to do this.
It's built in the micro moments, right?
Just be
it's all
kind.
micro behaviors built in the micro moments. And nicknames. Some people don't like nicknames, or having kind of stereotypical judgments about their race or their culture, right? Like just these little moments of exclusion, if we can begin to call them out and gently and kindly and compassionate, and like, hey, actually, like, this isn't, even like terms of endearment, whatever. Like if someone in the office is calling you love and you're a woman and you don't like it, just call it out. It doesn't have to be aggressive, doesn't have to be scary, doesn't have to have a whole manifesto written about it. It's just little micro behaviors that we're learning, building that awareness and changing our behaviors and being a bit accountable to ourselves. That's inclusion, right?
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree wholeheartedly. Wow, full circle.
You're very welcome.
Thank you very, very much, Katarina, for being on the show. This is, like I told the listeners and the viewers, I think this is critical to the future of humankind. I was going to say mankind. You see, I caught myself. Thank you so very much with that. We're going to put some references at the bottom. I'm sure there's going to be lots of stuff. So thank you again for participating.
Really
Hope
fun.
you enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Fabulous. So with that being said, my name is Martin Hunter. I'm the host of What CEOs Talk About, where we translate strategy into frontline operations. Thank you for listening.
Thanks for tuning in to What CEOs Talk About. Make sure to click subscribe to get notified about future episodes, or check us out at www.whatceostalkabout.com.